Hi, everybody. We're going to start. Good evening, and thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Wanda Ayala, and I am the Community Involvement Coordinator for the EPA for the Fair Lawn site. Tonight, we're gathered to talk about the proposed remedial action plan for the Fair Lawn site. And at the meeting, we're going to be discussing the proposed remedies and our preferred remedy and the rationale for that. Superfund law requires us to have a transcript of this meeting, so we have a stenographer here tonight, Linda Marino. After Mike makes the presentation, we're going to ask people then to come forward with their comments and their questions. I'd like to start off acknowledging any elected officials or reps that are here tonight. If you could just stand up and let people know that you're here. I'd like to ask people to please put your phones on vibrate so it doesn't disrupt the presentation. The restrooms, as most of you know, because you're from here, are outside to the left. When you get up to speak, you need to speak into the microphone and state your name so Linda can have it for the record. I'd like to introduce to you our EPA team. Mike Ziola, who's the remedial project manager for the site. Sharissa Singh, the hydrogeologist. Julie McPherson, who's our risk assessor. We have a Superfund manager sitting, Jeff Josephson, and we have David Klusner from my office. He's a public affairs rep. And without further ado, we're gonna start the presentation.
Good evening and welcome everybody. As Wanda said, we're here to talk about the Fairlawn Wellfield Superfund site and specifically the proposed plan that we have elected. I'm going to go through the slides and give you kind of again, Wanda. Excuse me. We're going to try to go through the slides as quickly as possible and get to the meat and bones of this, which is let you know what the proposed preferred remedy is. As Wanda said, I'm the project officer, manager, and Wanda is the community relations person. We have Julia as Julie McPherson, our risk assessor, and Sharissa Singh is our hydrogeologist. We're here tonight to discuss the preferred remedy and other cleanup options for the Fairlawn Wellfield groundwater contamination Superfund site. EPA will accept public comments until Wednesday, September 5th, 2018, and EPA will assess those public comments in its record of decision responsive summary. The meeting agenda, we're going to talk about the Superfund as an overview, what we do, the site information or history and background. Also, we'll discuss the investigation sampling results, then get into the risk assessment, Then talk about the alternatives that were identified in the feasibility study. And then lastly, we'll identify the preferred remedy. And then after I've done with the presentation, we can open up for questions and comments. Circular, Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act. Toxic waste disposal disaster prompted law passed by Congress in 1980 and amended in 1986. I think this is where I'm going to have to hold it. Sorry. Provides federal funds for cleanup of hazardous waste sites and allows EPA to respond to emergencies involving hazardous substances, and empowers EPA to compel potential responsible parties to pay for or conduct necessary response actions. The Superfund remedial process, just a quick overview. Site discovery is when EPA becomes aware of a potential release of hazardous substances into the environment. The next step, preliminary assessment and site inspections, where EPA determines if that release is a threat to human health and the environment, and then determines whether the hazards need to be addressed immediately, or if additional investigation work needs to be done, needs to be collected. The third step is the site then to be listed. Well, it gets proposed first on the national priorities list, and then it gets proposed first and then listed on the national priorities list. And when once it gets listed, federal funds become available to clean up actions on that site. Once that's done, we get into the process of actually doing the remedial investigation feasibility study, where we have the funds either through government funds, or we negotiate with the PRP's responsible parties to conduct the work. And the investigation starts. We do I'm losing myself here. We have the nature and extent of the contamination has to be identified through sampling, and then at that point once we get done with that, we move on to the proposed remedy. Once we have the information from the investigation, we do a feasibility study. Once we have all the information, we come up with a list of alternatives. From those alternatives, we select the proposed remedy that we issue to the public, which we did. And then we ask the public to comment on that. We give 30 days to comment on that. Once that's been done, once we receive the comments from that, we take the comments and we decide what the final remedy will be. And we document that into a record of decision. And that record of decision, from the record of decision, we have the remedy that we want to implement, and then we either fund it through EPA, or again we negotiate with the responsible parties to conduct the design and construction of that remedy. And at that point, the remedy will function and operate for a while. And once we've met the objectives that are outlined in the feasibility study, once those are met, then we can delist the site from the NPL list, or the national priorities list. The history and operation of the site. Quick overview. The Fairlawn site consists of 4 municipal wells 10, 11, 12, and 14, and the surrounding contaminated aquifer in Henderson Brook. All 4 municipal wells are part of the Westmoreland well field, which began operating in 1948. 2 of the 4 wells, FL 10 and 14, were used to supply drinking water to residents of Fairlawn. FL 11 and 12 are used just for monitoring. The treatment on the water supply system began in 1987, and at this stage, well 10 and 14, which were used to supply, are not supplying drinking water to the public since May of 2016. Some more background and history. Beginning in 1978, volatile organic compound contamination were detected in municipal wells. And NJDEP investigated all industrial and commercial facilities to conclude that the VOCs originated from the Fairlawn Industrial Park. At that point, NJDEP issued an administrative order of consent to Fisher and Sandvik, the potential responsible parties, in March of 1984 to conduct remedial activities on their properties, which those are considered the source areas. Kodak and the owners of 18-01 Pilot Drive have also conducted remedial activities on their property under NJDP authority. EPA became the lead agency for the non-source area contaminated groundwater in September of 1992, and the PRPs agreed to conduct the site groundwater RIFS in March of 2008. Remedial investigation, the purpose of it is to determine the nature and extent of contamination in the groundwater and surface water. The RI data identifies sources of contamination, the contaminants of potential concern, the pathways, mechanisms, and rates of contaminant migration through environmental media, and the concentrations of contaminants at points of exposure to human and ecological receptors. This gives you a broad look at the geology of the site. I'm going to kind of give you a quick little synopsis of what's happening here. Disregard the contour lines. But in general, the land surface slopes from the northeast to the southwest towards Henderson Brook. And what we have just below that is a layer of unconsolidated glacial sediments that the soils are typically heterogeneous. And the thickness of this layer is between 10 feet over in the northeast section to about 80 feet over by Henderson Brook. Just below that is the actual aquifer, the bedrock aquifer, which is the Passaic Formation. The aquifer was, as you can see here, there's two different zones to it. There's an upper zone and a lower zone dissected by a confining unit. Those are geology terms, so I'm not going to get into that. But just a general idea of what it looks like from a conceptual model look at how groundwater moves in the system. The RI activities, we installed 8, we're going to call them water table monitoring wells. They were installed and they were sampled. We also installed 12 bedrock monitoring wells and sampled them at 70 interval locations. 13 temporary water table wells were also used to identify permanent locations for those overburden or water table wells, and also to assess whether vapor intrusion testing should be done in the area. We also utilized 82 water table and bedrock monitoring wells as part of the sampling activity done on this site that were installed on the NJDEP properties or source areas. We also sampled several of the Westmoreland Wellfield municipal wells. 10, 11, 12, 14, and 23 were sampled during our investigation. And we actually sampled 4 different sampling events were conducted. March of 2010, actually June of 2010, March of 2011, November of 2015, and June of 2016. In total, we sampled the surface water. We sampled 70 locations in the surface water. We collected 70 samples from the surface water. We collected 600 samples. I should say the PRPs, the responsible parties, did all this work. They collected 600 samples from the groundwater. And water level measurements were collected from all of the monitoring wells at the site. And we also did vapor intrusion sampling at 9 commercial and 48 residential properties, including the Westmoreland Elementary School. We collected 12 samples. All the properties are currently not at risk for the contaminated vapors entering the space. This is a table I put together showing the range of concentration for the 4 identified contaminants of concern. The primary contaminants of concern are tetrachloroethylene, trichloroethylene, carbon tetrachloride, and 1,4-dioxane. And what I'm showing here is the range of concentration within the plume for the 2015 sampling event and the 2016 sampling event for the water table, the upper bedrock, and the lower bedrock. Give you some sense of where we're finding how extensive the contamination is for, say, the most top layer of aquifer to the bottom aquifer. I would try to describe stuff off this map, but it's going to be kind of hard for anybody to see anything. So I have other figures out here that maybe later folks want to take a look around and have any questions on it. But the general sense here is that the source areas are here where the high contamination is, and then as you move down gradient, vertically and horizontally, the concentrations are reduced extensively. So just kind of give you a sense. These lines here are concentration lines, so you can't see the numbers. It's hard to really tell. But here's where the major sources are, the higher concentrations. And down here by the wellfield, they're definitely not as high as they are up here. Surface water sampling results. I'm quickly going to give you an idea of what the brook looks like. The brook is sort of separated by 208, about 208. There's a northern section of it in the industrial park area, and there's a southern section below 208. We found that the max PCE concentration and carbon tet concentration were in the northern portion of it, over by the industrial park area. The highest level of PCE we found up there was 13.4 parts per billion, and it exceeded the surface water quality standard. And for carbon tet, we found that at 3.6 parts per billion, again exceeding the surface water quality standards. If you move to the south portion of the brook below 208, you'll notice that the concentrations go from 9.6 down to 0.7. And we didn't find carbon tetrachloride anywhere in the southern portion of the brook. Oh, I'm sorry. Roles and responsibility. EPA, our job at this point forward will be to complete the ROD, which will be the final remedy, and to negotiate with the responsible parties to conduct the design and construction of the final remedy. To remediate the groundwater, contaminated groundwater outside the source areas. DEP's role will be to continue to oversee the contaminated soil and source materials, as well as the groundwater remediation within the source areas. And the responsible parties, they're going to partner with EPA and NJDP to continue to clean up the contaminated soils and groundwater that will meet federal and state standards. The assessment of risk deficit, quick overview of the human health risk assessment. There are 4 steps to it. Hazard identification, which is to identify the contaminants of concern, which at this site the primary ones were PCE, TCE, 1,4-dioxane, and carbon tetrachloride. The exposure assessment, we will look at the potential human receptors. That would be on-site residents, children, adults, on-site construction worker, site worker, and transient visitors, most likely pre-adolescent and adolescents who walk in, who are just traveling through the town, so to speak. The toxicity assessment, we're looking at the toxicity number that for exposure to the contaminants of concern. And for the risk assessment, we're actually estimating the risk based on toxicity and exposure to those contaminants of concern. We also did a screening of the ecological risk assessment. We did a screen level ecological risk assessment. What we did here was we wanted to note the existing habitats and ecological receptors, and we evaluated the risk for those receptors in the surface water, and we determined that there were any risk to those ecological receptors. Human health risk assessment. The goal is to evaluate risk on a reasonably and maximum exposed individual, and exposures are evaluated in the absence of any well drilling restrictions and groundwater treatment system. The human health risk assessment site characterization we assume the residential use of groundwater without treatment for a Class 2A drinking water source aquifer. The potential exposure routes evaluated for these receptors included inhalation, dermal contact, and ingestion. The frequency of exposure for all receptors is similar on the current and future scenarios. We concluded that the groundwater from the aquifer and public water supply, if untreated, poses a risk that exceeds EPA's acceptance of cancer or non-cancer target levels for the child/adult resident and the construction site worker. Again, the contaminants of concern: PCE, TCE, carbon tetrachloride, and 1,4-dioxane. Feasibility study. The purpose of it is to identify remedial alternatives based on the site-specific conditions and RI sampling results that will eliminate, reduce, and control unacceptable risks to human health and the environment. The 4 remedial action objectives that were identified in the feasibility study: 1, prevent and minimize current and future exposure via ingestion, dermal contact, and inhalation of site-related contaminants in groundwater and surface water at concentrations greater than the federal and state standards. 2, restore the impacted aquifer to its most beneficial use as a source of drinking water by reducing site-related contaminant levels to the most stringent of the federal and state standards. 3, restore the impacted surface water to its most beneficial use by reducing site-related contaminant levels to the most stringent of federal and state standards. And 4, minimize the potential for further migration of groundwater containing site-related contaminants at concentrations greater than federal and state standards.
Can you keep the microphone a little further from your mouth?
Okay, and sometimes I pull it out and it seems like I'm not here.
Because it's too close,
It's
make
too
it like
close.
fuzzy sound.
Okay, sorry. The remedial alternatives, there were 3 that were identified in the FS. Alternative 1 is no action, not to do anything. Alternative 2, groundwater recovery and treatment, long-term monitoring, and institutional controls. Alternative 3, we would do again groundwater recovery and treatment. In addition, we would do air sparging, soil vapor extraction, and aerobic catabolic bioremediation, as well as the same long-term monitoring and institutional controls. The groundwater recovery and treatment system is proposed using up to 4 municipal wells to extract contaminated groundwater. In addition, advanced oxidation with hydrogen peroxide for removing VOCs and the 1,4-dioxane. Also, liquid granular activated carbon for removing the VOCs and perfluoride and PFAS compounds from the groundwater. And a final step would be chlorination prior to entering the water system. This is a cost analysis of all 3 alternatives. As you can see, alternative 1, no action, will be no cost involved there. Alternative 2, groundwater recovery and treatment, long-term monitoring, institutional controls. There's an initial capital cost of $5.2 million, and then an annual average operating maintenance and monitoring of about $440,000 for a final cost of $19.5 over a 30-year period. This number is calculated over a 30-year period. Alternative 3, groundwater recovery and treatment with ASSVE, with an anaerobic catabolic bioremediation with long-term monitoring and institutional control, has a $14 million capital cost, and the operation and maintenance is similar to alternative 2, to about $430,000. But the total cost is $29 million. EPA's 9 evaluation criteria to determine, or we usually evaluate these criteria to evaluate the alternatives that we've identified. It's something that we have to address as part of circular requirements. It's developed to ensure that all the important considerations are factored into the remedy selection decision and the comparison of options to determine the alternative relative to advantages and disadvantages between alternatives. These are 9 criteria. 1, overall protection of human health and the environment. 2, compliance with applicable or relevant and appropriate requirements. 3, long-term effectiveness and permanence. 4, reduction in toxicity, mobility, and volume through treatment. 5, short-term effectiveness. 6, implementability. 7, cost. 8, the state concurrence or acceptance of the remedy. And 9, the most important part is the community accepting it. This is our EPA's preferred remedy. It's alternative number 2. It's the groundwater recovery and treatment, where we're going to utilize upgraded systems to remove the VOC. We're going to upgrade the water system, water supply system, to also treat for the 1,4-dioxane and the PFAS before we contaminate the groundwater. And if necessary, and this would mean if we find out that the current wells are not capturing the plume, the groundwater plume, then we would have to look at adding additional wells and treatment units to be installed to ensure that we collect the groundwater, that we contain and remediate the groundwater plume. But that's if necessary, and that will be determined during design, where we do another pre-design investigation to determine that. The second part of it is to collect long-term monitoring of groundwater and surface water. And also the third part would be solution controls, where we would implement the NJDEP classification exemption area and well restriction to reduce exposure to contaminated water, groundwater. The basis for this preferred remedy: 1, groundwater recovery and treatment system provides mass reduction and hydraulic control of site-related COCs or contaminants of concern to achieve federal and state standards. 2, source control measures under NJDEP will reduce the concentrations of groundwater contamination. 3, the long-term monitoring and institutional controls ensures that human health and the environment are protected during operation of the groundwater recovery and treatment system. And the fourth reason, NJDEP concurs with the preferred remedy, as well as the EPA will look at the community comments to see how what their acceptance is for this particular remedy. And that's it for the presentation. We're going to open now for questions from.
We ask that you come to the front, speak into the mic, state your name.
Glenn Salka, Southern Drive, Fairlawn. I have 2 questions. One is, after the implementation begins, how long does it take before you can say the water is cleaned up?
Well, the next step would be for us to negotiate the enforcement document with the responsible party.
Yeah, but whenever that gets done,
Right, so
then
I'm
the
going
process
to,
stops.
so that could take about 6 months to get that done. And then there's the whole process of getting the documents in place to, the work plan, for all the work to be done, for design. Doing the design means, collecting more additional information, like I was mentioning before, whether we need to put in additional wells or additional units. That would be part of determining that. We also want to go out there and sample for the proposed PFAS compounds that we didn't sample, that we're going to be treating for it, but we didn't sample throughout the pool, so we want to go out and do that as well. I'm using the mic, I'm sorry.
That's right.
So getting to the work plan and then getting into the actual field to do the work, you're looking at somewhere between 12 to 18 months.
And my other question was, my notes are kind of messy here, but apparently this has been identified since at least 2010. I have another note, maybe decades.
You mean the site?
The site, yeah.
Well, the site was identified in 1978 when the wells were
So
contaminated.
30 years,
Yeah.
and now we're talking about another 18 months, based on what you just told me, before anything is really starting. What takes so long?
It's it's government. It takes a long time to go through all the steps to get you have to negotiate this. When you have a responsible party,
Yeah, I'm aware of, I know
you
that,
get
yes.
to the table, you have to negotiate all those documents.
30 years? There's something wrong with
Well,
a system that takes 30 years. And
I understand the concern.
it's more than a concern. I mean, I don't know how many, I've been living here for 33 years.
No, I know, but the site was discovered in '78. We know that the state was looking at it for quite a while. They determined where the sources were coming from. So the process there it takes a. I know it's.
I just, this is not a question, it's a statement. It just
No, I know.
seems absurd to me that at this point in time, we've identified the issues, you know who at least some of the PRPs are, and you're telling publicly, we're looking at another 18 months before we're going to begin remediation.
Well, actually,
That is frankly absurd.
I'd just like to clarify.
Sure.
Jeff Josephson.
During all this time, the water has been collected and treated since the air strippers were put on back.
Longer.
I'm
87.
sorry, we can't hear you. In 1987.
Okay.
And so there has been something ongoing since 1987 in terms of remediating the water.
Okay.
What we've been doing is investigating in more detail the nature and extent, and that is the full extent. At that time, it was recognized as a contaminant in public water supply, but the actual distribution of the contaminants wasn't well understood. If you look at the figures here, you'll see that, for instance, the figure there with the blue coloring, it
Yeah.
shows that it's a very complicated bedrock system there, and it does take a significant effort to put in the wells. Those wells, some of them are 300 feet deep, they're in bedrock, they take a long time to put in. And so what we're looking at is what is the final thing that we really need to do. There has been pumping and treating going on for a really long time, and it has prevented the contamination from going further towards, say, the river underneath the homes and all that. And the other thing we understood is that, what Michael said is that up by the source areas north of 208, the contamination is much higher. South of there, and it has decreased, and it continues to decrease in concentration.
Okay, all right,
Okay.
thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Lisa. I'm here for my mother and father living on Chester Street. I guess it's south of the contamination spot. I'm just curious, you keep saying responsible parties. I've never heard them mentioned. I'd like it explained a little bit more in layman's terms. I'd like to know what the differences are between the remedy option 2 and 3, because obviously that's the middle ground for the cost. I'd like to ensure that the remedy cost is going to be borne by the responsible parties and the state, and it's not going to be impacted by the property taxes. And I want to know what's going to happen to the values of the homes. My parents are trying to sell their house. They got notified of this, and now buyers are going to be concerned that they have contaminated water with little kids.
Okay, well, the properties, the value of the homes, oh, I'm sorry. Well, your first question was the PRPs, right? The responsible parties. But they're the ones responsible for the contamination being used.
Who are they though? I've never heard the name. Is it? I know you've mentioned the Kodak site, and now you have the Promenade.
Well,
I didn't read
read.
everything, so I apologize.
Okay. I'll go back to the slide from the beginning. I know I went through the history pretty quickly. Here. Fisher and Sandvik were the potential responsible party. They were identified back in 1984.
Okay.
So they're the ones that are currently doing the work for the RIFS that was done. They were the ones who paid for that, for that to be done.
And for the future costs, who's going to bear that?
Future costs, they'll bear it as well.
Okay.
So that's what I was saying. We'll negotiate, once the final remedies is selected, we'll negotiate with them to do that, to do the design and construction for the remedies.
Okay. So then there is a difference between remedy 2 and remedy 3. I know you guys kind of picked
Yes.
2, so I know 3 seems like it'd be a little bit more.
3 is a little bit more costly because there's additional treatment units being installed to handle the mass concentrations in the plume. It's a, thank you, Wanda. They're virtually the same. Go back. Back a little bit. Yeah.
Forward.
Right there. They're the same alternatives, except the air sponging and soil vapor extraction will be implemented in the water table aquifer to handle the mass concentrations for VOCs. And the aerobic catabolic bioremediation is handling the 1,4-dioxane in the upper bedrock portion. So the difference in cost, it really is with those units being implemented. It's the capital cost. It's actually installing them into, as a unit. So that's where the cost really is with that particular remedy. If you go back or go forward to the cost analysis, this is where the capital cost, installing those units, is where you see the big difference. Because virtually the operation and maintenance costs are similar.
I'm just curious as far as safety, because the
As far-
government just said this has been going on, it's going to take 18 months before they start work.
Right.
And, why not go, for the full nut right now since they're on the hook for paying for it? I'm just safety-wise, I'm just a little bit concerned by that.
Well, the actual system itself was being treated prior to it being, turned offline or shut down. So, I mean, right now, no one is drinking the water. So what we're attempting to do with Alternative 2 is we're attempting to upgrade the system so that we can handle the VOCs, the 1,4-dioxane, and the perfluoroprophos. So when the system gets turned back on, you have clean water.
Okay, you just mentioned that something, so how long were the people drinking the contaminated water for?
What I know about how long the system has been running since '87 with treatment on it, prior to that when it was discovered in '78. So I can go by those numbers there.
So, because I know you mentioned different wells and stuff, so just geographically, what area was drinking contaminated water since 1978?
What I know about the system is that it's only one portion of the entire water system. There are other well fields in Fairlawn, as well as there's water being sourced in from public utilities. From what I understand is that about 10% of the Westmoreland well field gets put into the entire water system. So, and I know from speaking with the borough manager, the water is blended, when it gets into the system.
So everybody in Fairlawn since 1970?
Well, no, because the water was being treated since '87, so the water was clean. There were air strippers that were installed back in '87, so no one was drinking contaminated water at that point.
But prior to that?
But prior to that,
My family's been on Chester Street for over 100 years, so I'm assuming they've been drinking. And I guess even now, if it's going to take 18 months, so the water is contaminated now, or there is?
well, we do know that there's a contaminated groundwater underneath, migrating to the well field.
Okay.
But the wells are currently running, but the wells are being treated and are discharged to the surface water. So that water is not being put into the water system.
Okay.
So no one's drinking the water.
And it's not coming out of the pipe, so.
No, no. You will. She's next.
My name is Rich.
Hi, Rich.
I would like to know, how did the contamination start? From where?
It started in the industrial park.
Industrial park.
Right.
Now,
Up in the
did it
city.
come from Echo and from Kodak having a cistern whereabouts they went and put their effluents into the ground?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I don't know. I just know that the sources.
Now, I'm going to explain to you. Back in the 60s, when they were starting to make the industrial park, it used to be farmland. As a kid, we used to block up the Henderson Brook and go swimming in there. We also had a wooden wine barrel where water would purge out of the ground. We used to drink it right there. I'm talking back in the 40s. Turn around in the 60s when they were starting to build in there, it came to my attention that somebody went and put a cistern in 2 buildings over there, Echo and Kodak. Nobody ever went and checked that out. There's 3 wells in the Westmoreland tract, am I correct?
There are 4 actually.
4 of them? Oh, I knew it was 3. Now, there is a water tower in that field. At one time, back in 69, 70, the party that was in at the time, the people here, wanted to put a senior citizen housing in there. I got a little irate. I was much younger then. Now it turned around. It comes to my attention that you cannot build 100 feet on either side of a brook. They did have houses at the end of at Forest Street, where he's right near the brook. Never had a flood there. I've lived in the area since '59. As a kid in the 40s, I used to leave Patterson to come over here and we would dam up the Henderson Brook and go swimming in there. Now, nobody ever checked to see if there was a cistern in any of that property over there?
That's not, the investigation we've done here is, what was done on the, I really can't answer your question because this seems like this is years and years and years ago. This wasn't discovered.
There was no EPA.
Right, there's no EPA. So, the site wasn't known until '78.
Now, the water tower that's at the end of Forest Street, they went and put that up, I think in the 70s. And it has ping pong balls in it. And it aerates the PCBs, from what I understand. It constantly runs. And there's also like a 1 million or 1.5 million gallon water tank on 11th Street. Do you know what that's for?
Well, I believe that is the treatment system that's been there since 1987.
You sure that's not in case Fairlawn Industrial Park catches on fire? They have extra water there for that?
You have to ask.
I'm not aware of that. I can tell you from what you described, you're describing the air strippers along with the water tower where the water is being held.
That's right. That's right. Now, have you made, and when you have all the yellow, pink, and whatever it may be there, have you made a, gone to each house and find out if they had any cancer or any medical problems from this here, trying to make a remediation of all this property? Have you gone to anybody's houses to ask them?
What we have done is, if we see that there's a problem in the shallow aquifer,
Just putting numbers up on air and telling everybody about all kind of contaminants in the water, but you haven't gone around and asked people and find out. You haven't done that.
what we have done is we've gone to people's homes that we've identified as a possibility that the vapors have entered their house, possibly.
In other words, you put pipes in their cellar?
No, let me finish what I was saying. What I'm trying to say is that we've gone to people's homes and we've sampled their homes to determine if any vapors from the contaminated water has entered their homes. We found that none have.
Okay. But I do know that down on Fairlawn Ave, where the dry cleaners used to be, that is really contaminated over there. That has nothing to do with us.
Right.
Absolutely nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
Correct.
But anyway, when is this going to take place and what are you going to do about it?
The groundwater contamination, we're going to deal with it. It's going to take a while not a while, but we're going to have to negotiate with the responsible parties, get them on board, get a work plan in place, get the data we need, and then construct a remedy. So like I said from the previous gentleman, it would take between 12 months to 18 months to get all that done. That's what we're looking at.
Now, in the 11th Street, Forest Street, Cedar Street, are them houses going to be affected right alongside the brook? Cedar Street, Forest Street.
Down in this area here, you're saying? On this side?
Yes.
Okay, we have tested some of the homes in that area for vapors, and we haven't found any of the homes to be a concern to the groundwater. So, no, we've done that. We've done that type of work, not just in here. We've done it up here. We've done it in here. So we've gone to a lot of homes. Some of the commercial properties have been tested. We tested the school, the elementary school. I mentioned earlier we took 12 samples from the school and didn't find anything.
Plus, I know I received a letter, something about, it was like 200 or 300 feet underground with the contaminants. 200 or 300 feet? How's that going to affect anybody?
Well, where it's affecting is that down there.
It's the aquifer.
When the wells are pumping,
Right.
which they are now, but they're pulling the contamination down into those wells. The reason why there was treatment put on that system back in
Anybody
87.
else is going to comment?
So,
Anybody else?
I mean, what we're doing now is we're going to do the same thing, but we're just trying to upgrade the system to handle the 1,4-dioxane and the sulfophos. That's what we're trying to do.
In an effort to give everybody an opportunity,
They can have it.
they can
I'll
have it.
leave.
No, you can come back. I was going to say.
Yeah,
you can
no,
come
no,
back.
let him go.
Okay.
Let him go.
Thank you. All right.
This handout is comparable to your presentation.
I tried to make it
Yeah, I was going through it. Now,
more extensive than that presentation.
usually when they evaluate data, they compare it to limits, like specifications, testing limits.
Correct.
And this table here that you have in your presentation
Correct.
shows like the limits, it shows the amounts at microgram per liter.
Correct.
Okay, where are the limits? Like, where are the limits to this?
It wasn't included there. I can tell you what the limits are for, like, say, PCE.
Yeah.
I know for EPA, the MCL is 5 parts per billion.
Because this way you can compare, to see how much above the, like, you
Right.
see this, but you don't know.
At the MCL for drinking water for PC is 5 parts per billion.
Yeah.
For TC, I believe it's the same, 5 parts per billion. I'm not sure about carbon tetrachloride. It's 5 too? It's 5 as
They're
well.
all
about
5
the safe-
parts per
you're talking about
billion.
the safe
This is-
numbers? When
Yeah,
you say the limits?
yeah, that's like, when I
That
say
should
the
have been
limit, the
included.
safe,
Just one at a time, please.
yeah. What I was getting at, usually there's specifications, there's limits, so you compare the contaminated water to what the limits are. And,
Correct.
and that you evaluate the risk.
Correct.
Yeah.
What I
And,
was trying to do there is to kind of give you an idea of what
Oh.
we found.
yeah, so basically 5, yeah, I'm just curious, how much above
Right.
the limit where. And like usually, I'm a toxicologist. Usually when things like this happen, you say this is something going back to 1978. Usually case studies are done, because they look at teratogenic effects or, different carcinogenic effects. So has anything been done like that?
You mean like a risk study?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did that. I mentioned it earlier.
Is it in here?
It should be after that section with the data in it.
They looked at,
They considered this, they considered studies, and that's, the risk assessment includes a 4-step process.
yeah.
So it includes hazard identification, the exposure
Right.
assessment, toxicity assessment, and then risk characterization. So what that means is, when they do a risk assessment, the hazard identification is they collect the samples and then it identify which concentrations exceed a risk level.
Right.
And that's on a conservative side, those risk values are. And when they do the exposure assessment, they assess what, or include data which suggests, well, if we're gonna evaluate a resident here, how long are they living here? And how much are they drinking per day?
Right.
And so forth. So that is involved in the exposure assessment step. And then the toxicity assessment, which is what you were talking about, is looking at data that for the toxicity for all the chemicals that are posing or could potentially pose a risk at the site.
Right.
And so those steps combined evaluate what the risks are for each receptor, an individual.
Right.
We're talking about a resident or a industrial worker, construction worker, and so forth. So that's what that risk assessment does, and that's how you consider the toxicity information that you're referring to
Right.
in this step.
Because usually it takes 20 years for something to show up, accumulation.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, all right. I mean, those are I was curious.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ma'am, you stated your name earlier?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Nancy Sperling. How are you?
Good. Hi, Nancy.
Can I say one thing? If you look on page 30 of your document, it does have all the standards in there.
I saw that earlier. Yeah. I just. Okay.
Just
Thanks.
they're there.
Thank you, Jen.
My name's Robin
Hi,
Frizzell.
Robin.
Hi. I'm here on behalf of my mother, Sidel Singer, who's been living in Fairlawn since 1961, and I grew up here. I have a few questions. I'm curious, why did you choose choice number 2 over choice number 3? Did it have to do with the cost? Because if
Not necessarily.
the people who did all the polluting are
Right.
paying for it, of all things being equal, why not go for the Cadillac plan?
I think because the cost benefit of putting in the extra system to get the mass out wasn't going to shorten the lifespan of the pump and treat at the well field.
Was it going to shorten the line?
Shorten the lifespan of having to treat the groundwater. Say if it took 40 years to treat that groundwater,
Right.
actually going in there to, try to pull out the mass it wasn't going to shorten that 40-year lifespan. So it didn't make sense to have to really go tackle that when first there's caveats as being that the actual system itself, or we spoke up before, installing those systems to actually effectively remove the contaminants in those areas hasn't been it's a proven technology, but it hasn't been implemented in a way that can be demonstrated that it actually works. So say if we looked at
Can you put number 2 and number 3? That's
Yeah, I'm gonna-
yeah. Like, are there any advantages of number 3 over number 2? Because if we're not incurring the cost, if the polluters are incurring the cost,
I'm going to give her the.
you know.
You want to look at the cost, right? The cost of what you're looking at, or
Well, I'm just, what is, if they were all the same price, which one would you choose?
we would still choose alternative 2, because alternative 2, it's going to remediate the groundwater at when it's going to capture plume, it's going to remediate it at whatever it's.
It's going to be just as effective as number
It's just as
3?
effective, but what I'm trying to say is they're both effective in a sense when it comes to the groundwater recovery and treatment. I think what you're focused on is the fact that the dollars really jump up when you include the other two systems. The other two systems are geared towards reducing the mass in the plume. And what I'm trying to say is those two systems, when you look at them, even though they're proven technology, they aren't proven in this particular area of the geology. So we're looking to put in wells, but we have to demonstrate that it even works. And we don't know until we get there. And it may not even work.
What happens if you...
As Michael explained, there are 9 criteria that each of the remedies is valued against. And so that the results of that analysis led us to choose preferred alternative as number 2. Part of the reasoning was that if you look at the anaerobic co-metabolic bioremediation, for instance, for 1,4-dioxane, that has not really been demonstrated to be effective at the scale that we're looking at this site. And so there would be a lot of work that would have to go into it, and there's really no guarantee that it would actually reduce the concentration. And if it could do it, it was determined that there still wouldn't be any reduction in time for the overall remedy to be achieved. And so with that kind of uncertainty to engage in the project for many, many years and not even know, with greater certainty, I think, that it would be successful, it doesn't direct us to that remedy.
What happens if you go over budget or you find that you need to go back and do more work? Can you then go back to Kodak and the other offenders and ask them for more money?
What we will do is, Kodak declared bankruptcy, okay?
Right.
Just as part of that. So we wouldn't go back to them. The other parties, we would go through a similar process to what we're doing now. We would have to have a record that states why it's not working, and we would amend this decision and say we have to do these additional things. And then again, we would notice the people who we felt were responsible, and we would negotiate with them, and if they're willing to do it, they would do it. If for some reason they weren't, then the federal government would pay for it. So that's...
The federal okay, so in no way would Fairlawn residents have to incur the cost?
No, that's why there is a super fund. It would be it's a situation where if there are responsible parties and the enforcement process is effective at getting them to pay, they'll pay. But if for some reason, for instance, if Kodak was the only party and they went bankrupt, the federal government would step in, and being on the national priorities list allows the federal government to expend the funds to complete the remedy.
Okay, and I just have my other question is, if this was discovered in 1978, I know that Kodak did not close in their location on 208. They were open many more years after 1978.
Right.
Why weren't they forced to close in 1978 or stop doing whatever dumping they were doing?
I can't answer that question since EPA wasn't involved at that time. We didn't
Can
involve-
somebody from Fairlawn answer that question? A representative, is there somebody?
Unless there's anybody here.
Okay. And just also, my mother lives on Kossuth Place. Her water was brown a couple of weeks ago. And she didn't get any notice, nothing, no phone message, no, I don't believe she had an email. She's older, so maybe she did get an email. But You know, why would the water be brown?
I couldn't answer that question. That would be a question for the people in Fairlawn.
Yeah, okay. Okay, all right, well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good evening. Hi. Christina Catrone, Gray Janice Place in Fairlawn, and I'm a councilwoman. I have a few questions. Kind of just if I piggyback off of what the woman was asking about in front of me about option 2 and option 3. It seems that option 3 or alternative 3 it says that it would require a pilot test, and I think that was getting to what you were saying as to whether or not it would be effective. So was it considered that we have the responsible parties do the pilot test while also implementing alternative 2? So that if the pilot shows that that would go above and beyond and make it even better, then we could add that in?
I think the way it's set up, the way we have it listed, it's either 2 or 3. I think the beneficial thing here is to obviously to go with 2 first,
Okay.
see how that works. If that doesn't materialize and work well, and we need to go back and do something else, then obviously we'll look at alternative 3 and see if that would be something we need
Okay.
to do.
Okay, and then there's been, conversations about the residents and property taxes and who's going to pay for this, and that the responsible parties are obviously responsible for covering the cost. But this remediation is not guaranteed. So if we don't get to a point where it's fully remediated in a timely enough fashion that we feel comfortable allowing our residents to drink the water, we need to, let's say, purchase water as a result of wanting to provide our residents with the safest drinking water. Are the responsible parties going to pick up the cost of how much more it might cost the borough to have to purchase water?
I can't answer that question. I can answer that question now because that's for a later time. What I can tell you is that what we're planning to implement here, the treatment system that's going to go in is going to clean the water. It's going to be really clean. We're not going to see the volatiles there. We're not going to see the 1,4-dioxane. We're not going to see the perfluorophos. So they're going to get clean water that's going to be implemented into the system.
And is there
Now,
a
how long that's
timeline?
going to take?
Yeah, that's true.
It all depends.
Are we talking another 20 years? Because I don't think it's acceptable to wait another 20 years to get clean drinking water.
I'm not going to put a number on it. I know we've done some calculations on it. We're thinking 30 or 40 years, but I mean, we don't know for sure. It's,
Okay.
There are things that we're going to do during design, more investigative work that will help us out, better understand that. Maybe, putting another well or two to really pull in the plume. But that's not here. We don't have those answers right now tonight. So we'll know that once we get the design completed.
So after that 12 to 18 month period,
Correct.
we'll have a better idea of how much time it would take.
I mean, 12 to 18 months means we'll get in the field to get the data.
Right.
And then at some point after that, we'll have some better answers.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Alan Kahn, Chandler Drive.
Hi, Alan.
I've lived on Chandler Drive since 1975, so I've been there for a while. Just a question. I don't know necessarily all the contaminants you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
The one I'm most familiar is the 1,4 dioxane.
1,4-dioxane.
Right. And from what you said earlier, it seems like that's been a problem going back to the 70s or maybe even earlier. Is that correct?
We don't know how far back it goes. What we do know is it was detected in the well field, I believe, in 2013 when the state sampled the well
Okay.
field as part of the program. We know it was then there.
Okay.
We then sampled for it in 2015 and 2016, where we then found out that it was throughout the plume.
Mhm.
So this is why it was part of the rationale for trying to upgrade the system with the better treatment unit to remove those compounds from the water.
Actually, I do know that number from 2013 because under the unregulated chemicals part of the Fairlawn Water Report, it showed that as a test in 2013, and the number was 3.24.
Correct.
What is the standard for that particular unregulated chemical?
I'm trying to think, what is the standard? 1,4-dioxane?
There's a
0.4? Okay.
So we're at 3.24 in 2013.
Can I just clarify?
Sure.
That is not a drinking water standard. What that is
Microphone.
yeah, sure.
That is not a drinking water standard. That is a standard developed by the state of New Jersey and is a groundwater quality standard.
Okay.
And so there's a little bit of difference there. Drinking water standards are regulated by the Clean Water Act, and that's what regulates.
Okay, so what would be the the drinking water standard for that particular?
There is not one.
There isn't one.
That's why it's in the unregulated
Right.
contaminant. And so I can tell you what that is that's a program that was developed by EPA under the Clean Water Act. And what it does is, as time goes on, different chemicals are discovered throughout the United States. The law requires that only a certain number of chemicals be regulated under the Clean Water Act for municipalities. And so as time goes on, they can change which contaminants are regulated. But there has to be an assessment across the country to determine the toxicity of contaminants, what concentrations are a risk to contaminants, and how many people are actually being exposed to a contaminant. Because they don't want to regulate something where nobody is ever exposed to it. Basically,
Right.
they want to get the broadest coverage. And so they have this program, they do the monitoring, and then they discuss with states or at a federal level whether a drinking water standard should.
So let me ask you this question. Even if it's an unregulated chemical, and the standard that we know about is 0.4, and we have a reading in 2013 of 3.24, how high does it have to get before someone says, you know what, maybe we need to look at this?
Actually, in 2013, the standard was not 0.4, the
Okay.
standard was 10.
Okay.
And so it was below the standard at that
Okay.
time. And when the standard did change, because
Which was when, approximately?
it was in 2016, I believe.
Okay.
Actually, November 2015,
2015.
it was changed.
Okay.
You also have to understand, no one knew about 1,4-dioxane before that.
Right.
1,4-dioxane
Okay.
became known to people probably about 4 or 5 years ago.
No, people have known about it. But the standard did change at that time.
Right.
And
Okay, so then since
the
2015,
town was informed.
Yes.
And they did turn off the well field at that time.
in 2015?
And they did not have to.
2016.
2016.
16.
But they didn't have to. There were other solutions. They could have just diluted it more.
Right,
So just,
okay.
But they did turn it off.
Okay, so, which leads me back to another question. For instance, in our water report that we get annually, starting with the 2013 reading, so the 2013 water report, the 2014 water report, the 2015 water report, the 2016 water report, and the 2017 water report. When it comes to the unregulated chemicals within that water report, that page has been identical for all those years. Nothing has ever changed, they just reprint the same one. So, we know in 2013 there was a reading of 3.24, but because they reprint the same page every single year, do we know what the readings have been since then?
I couldn't answer that. That would be for the water department here.
Okay.
I'm not.
So, you guys don't know about any
I
more
don't
current
know.
readings than that number?
What I do know is that
Actually, I think they will change the number, though. You probably will sample in 2020. I think that's the next.
And does that make sense, that we have to wait till 2020 to get
Like I
another
say,
reading?
The federal government makes money available to states so that public water supplies can do these types of analysis and understand the issue across the country. And so I believe that there will be the next round in 2020. That's when it's scheduled to happen.
Yeah, but we're now talking about being published in 2021, and we're in 2018, and the first reading, the only reading we have is
I mean, you
2013.
can talk to your town and ask them to sample for it. If you'd like to, you can do that too.
Okay, so if the council members are here, they will, I'm sure, get on that. Last thing, when it comes to wells that we have, and we obviously there's contaminants, I'm just thinking maybe the long-term approach should just be, well, close the wells, don't worry about it, get water from Passaic Valley or Suez to make up the difference. Does that seem reasonable, unreasonable? Or is there a reason not to do that and to go through all these steps? Where we need to clean it up, yes, but not beyond where we have to do it in a way we have to reopen the wells and use them again.
well, the wells aren't
It's gonna take
utilized
forever.
for drinking water currently.
Yeah, I'm talking about down the road.
Well, down the road, once we have the system built and treated for all the compounds and the contaminants you mentioned tonight, that water would be clean. And at that point, it would be, utilized again as part of our drinking water system.
Okay, so if the process starts 12 to 18 months from now,
Right.
when potentially could that occur?
I off the top of my head, 2021.
Okay.
I couldn't give you a specific date, obviously, I'm giving you a kind of an estimation.
Well, of course, you can't. be that
So
specific.
we're saying 12 to 18 months, if everything goes well.
Mhm.
So you're looking at, 2020, 2021.
Okay.
That's.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Lisa Swain. Full disclosure, I am the former mayor of Fair Lawn, currently an assemblywoman. And I'm here with another state representative, Chris Tully, also an assemblyman for this district. So obviously we care very much about this. I'm going to just finish off where Alan left off. Let's say you do the testing, you clean up the water, and then you open the wells. The water that's now going to be flowing through the wells is coming from that groundwater. Is that going to be as clean as the currently tested water? Or is it, it's still going to have all those chemicals and it's still flowing underground?
Right, well, right now the wells that are pumping are being treated, and with air strippers, the current air strippers, and then discharged to the brook. It's going to stay that way until this system is built, the treatment system is built. Once that is built, the groundwater from those wells will go through the system, get treated, as I mentioned before in one of my slides, the process of what it will look like. Yeah, right here. The idea here is to use all 4 municipal wells, and the treatment system will be upgraded to advanced oxidation hydrogen peroxide to deal with the VOCs and the 1,4-dioxane. And then we're also adding in liquid granular activated carbon to remove not just the VOCs, but even the PFOA and PFOS. So that will remove all the chemicals in there, and then obviously there's a final step of chlorination before it actually gets put into the system. So whatever water is in those wells, it's going to be cleaned through the system, and on the other end, it's going to be clean water. I'm not sure.
Yes, you're somewhat answering it, but I've done some reading about this topic for many years. I understand that the carbon can help, but it doesn't completely remove those chemicals. Where I'm getting at is about the wells.
Correct.
Because as Alan just mentioned about the cost of going through all of this, and then we decide, okay, now we're going to open up the wells and the water's going to flow, is it really going to be okay for everybody to drink, even with this new system?
Well, I think this system will go through a lot of testing and sampling before the water will be put back into, throughout the entire system. So we're not gonna sit there and turn this on and hope that the system works and not actually test to make sure that it does. So that takes a little bit of a process. Once the system is built, they'll run it, they'll start testing it, they'll kind of work through all the kinks, what's going on with the system. And at some point, it'll work, efficiently, that the water will be clean. When it comes to the cost of all this, that's something that, it's been cost out in our feasibility study. But as to who's going to pay for it, that'll be something that'll be discussed down the road.
Another question I have is, you mentioned about the blended water.
Correct.
And that's something that we discussed several times. But we as council people were told that the water is not really blended. Is that your understanding? That the water that comes from the wells goes to the houses that are in that area? That it doesn't just come into some central area, get blended, and then go out again, that it's coming from the wells, which is one of the reasons why the wells are shut down.
The way I understand it is that for Westmoreland, the wells are pumping, they get treated. There's an initial step of a final step of chlorination, and then it goes into a holding tank. At some point, when needed, that water is put into the system. So it is a blend of the other sources, whether it's coming from, say, Cadmus or the other well fields, or it's coming from Passaic Valley that's being utilized as a public utility. It's all going into the same say, system. So better to, you know, that's how I understand it. Since I'm not the water provider here, I'm not going to give you a full understanding of everything. Just kind of the general sense of what I've gotten.
Okay. And last question. I'm sorry, I missed the first few minutes.
Okay.
Was there something that triggered the EPA finally doing something?
Well,
I mean, I know it's been a Superfund site for a long time.
It's been here since '78. The state was involved then. I know in '92 it transferred from the state to EPA. So EPA, I know EPA issued notice letters to the PRPs, responsible parties. I think it was in '84, I believe. So we were involved, but we weren't directly involved. The state was directly involved. We became the direct lead in '92. And so at that point, we went and started doing a lot of investigative work, trying to find out who was responsible. We hired the USGS to do a groundwater study. We did a lot of things, you know, between say '92 and when we finally got the PRPs to sign on a dotted line to do the RIFS. So
Because
I
I
know it's a
go
long
back
time.
to the first man who questioned, is he still here? Or he's back there. So it took you from '92 to now to decide, all right, we better do something?
Well, it's not, like I said, there's a lot of work in between. We had the
I-
USGS involved, we did extensive search of PRPs, we then got the responsible parties to come on board to do the RIFS. And the RIFS started, I think, in 2009. So and it took a while because we installed, as I mentioned before on one of the slides, we installed bedrock wells, overburden wells, flow table wells. So we did a lot of work, a lot of data was collected, you know, reports were prepared. We reviewed a lot of the data, and we then determined we're going to go back out there and put more wells in. So this was a kind of, you know, step process to get to this point. It does take time. You've got negotiations. You've got, reports are submitted, they're reviewed, commented on. All this stuff happens. It does take a bit of time.
And that's why, you can see why we're all very frustrated.
Oh, I
mean,
I
this
understand
is-
totally.
Yeah, so I want to bring up my colleague here because, you know, we want to really know if there's anything we can do at the state level to help to speed things along. So I want to give Chris a moment.
Yes, and I actually, just to piggyback on a couple of things, Chris Tully with the State Assembly. So take me through the first 6 months. So you mentioned a negotiating period. Is there anything that you've done to shorten that time span? Because, as you had said, this is 25 years with the EPA now. Is there a reason that that's going to take so long before
You
it's
know,
actually implemented?
maybe Jeff, you want to speak on it?
The process of negotiating a remedy with responsible parties is done in conjunction with the Department of Justice. And we follow the process and procedures of the law, which requires us to send out a certain amount of notice letters to establish that the administrative record supports the information, to offer an opportunity for them to negotiate with the government and give them time to consider that negotiations with the government. And so that will take a certain amount of time. It is a certain process, and they have certain obligations under the notice provisions that we provide to them in terms of responding back to us. We have to look at what is called a good faith offer. It has to be evaluated by both the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Justice, and then we will enter into negotiations at that period. There is an established time frame to negotiate, which in the case it fails, we would then move on to look at federal funding for it. So there is an established deadline for that. It can be extended, and for good circumstances it would be extended, but there is a certain process that we have to lay out. It's not completely up to our control since we do it in conjunction with the Department of Justice.
So there's no guarantee it can only go 6 months, and if it actually
There's
didn't
no
go...
guarantee that it can go that. That's what I said, is that there is a certain amount of time established, and for good cause or good reason, it can be extended.
Second question, just to piggyback on what Councilman Catrone had mentioned. Now, you mentioned option 2 is the more viable option, and that if the results, you won't know whether you need to continue with option 3 is an option unless you see the results of option 2.
Well, we've selected.
You select option 2, correct?
So we're gonna implement that. If we find that it's not doing what we expect it to do, then we'll look at alternative 3 or something else.
Got it. So how long will it take between knowing if option 2 had a positive results and whether you look at other options? Say if option 2 didn't have a positive result, how long would that take you to assess?
Well, I think once the system is built and once the system is running and we do the testing and sampling on it, we'll know probably within, say, if we're built, probably within a couple of months after it's built and it's running, we'll have the data in and we'll be able to know whether it's operating efficiently. I mean, this is a pretty standard type of pump and treat system, so it should work. It's not something that we're expecting not to work. We're pretty much guaranteeing that it's going to work. The question becomes, do we want to be there 40 or 50 years? Is there something else we can do to really knock out some of the concentrations in the plume that maybe shorten the lifespan of, say, the pump and treat system? That would be something that we want to look at over the long term.
Got it. And just third and final, and first I just want to commend, my colleague Zoe Moseda, the mayor and council, for all they've done here locally on this issue and trying to find solutions. And while they have a wealth of knowledge here, I guess my one question is, we do have a good-sized room here tonight, but what is the EPA doing to make sure that the entire, there's a wealth of knowledge here with residents of Fairlawn. What is EPA doing to make sure that you're collecting information, collecting comments? The deadline is September 5th, correct?
September 5th.
So what are you doing to reach out to residents to make sure that they know this is the time to let the EPA know what's going on, what they've seen, what they know, so that you have as much information from residents as possible going forward from this project?
Yeah, well, Wanda, we
put together the proposed plan. We have a dedicated webpage to it, and we've shared the information with the township so they could put it on their website. And was anything shared through the contractor information, like the prop or anything?
No, we have fact sheets back
Right.
there. The proposed plan with all my information and when the time frame is, with my email address, my phone number.
Right.
I don't think
We don't have
the
any.
webpage.
The webpage is
is
updated,
up.
yes, and it has the proposed plan on it and
Correct.
the fact sheet.
And can you submit comments right through the
I
website?
believe we also put it
Yes.
on the borough.
Yeah,
website.
I shared it with Carol and
Okay.
Ken.
I think anything that can be done to notify the public, whether it's a canvas or a reverse alarm or
Yeah,
an blast.
we also put a notice in the newspaper.
Correct.
Okay, just say anything to make sure that people.
And that's why we have the sheets in the back. Is not a sign-in sheet. It's a sheet where you can sign up to receive information. So we can have like an ongoing list. And at any time, if anybody needs for us to come back and talk to them, they're free to do that. We've done that in the past. We've met with people in school. We've met with different people. They just have questions and concerns, and we sit down and we have discussions.
I have my information here, so you
Right.
can take my information down. You can call me or you can email me.
We'll make sure you get our information, and I echo
Yeah.
the Assemblywoman's comments. Anything we can do at the state level to be helpful, we want to do. So,
appreciate it.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Bouvier, and I've lived in Fairlawn for nearly 10 years. Hi, I have two questions. The first is, do you have any data on the anticipated removal efficiencies for alternatives 2 and 3?
Any data on that right now?
Yeah, I know you mentioned that they're pretty standard treatment methods that have been used. So is there a typical removal efficiency that you see with those methods when they've been implemented elsewhere for these type of contaminants?
I'm sure there's literature out there for general types of pump and treat system.
With these treatments?
For this particular treatment, I'm sure there's some literature out there. I don't have it here tonight,
Okay.
but I'm sure online there's some.
Is that something that you reviewed as part of your comparison between alternatives 2 and 3?
Well, it went through a
kind of
process, during the feasibility study. Again, the RIFS was conducted by the responsible party, so I'm sure they went through a reasonable, search to look at whether these treatment options would work, say, for those particular compounds.
Okay, is that information that can be shared with the public?
It's most likely in the feasibility study, which is attached to the new investigation, and that's probably. I know it's on our website as a file.
Okay.
I'm not sure if the borough has it attached on their webpage, but there's a link to our webpage, and from that webpage there's a link to all the documents that pertain to this preferred remedy.
Okay.
The link is called Administrative Record for this particular site. You can click on there, and then there's a long list of documents. As part of that, you'll see the criminal investigation. There's a number of different appendices to that, as well as the feasibility study.
And if you don't find it, just shoot me an email.
Okay.
My name is Wanda, and I'll send you the link to it.
Okay, great. And then my other question, you mentioned a few times the operation and maintenance costs associated with these systems. Is that something that the responsible parties would pay for? And if so, would they be required to set up a funding source to cover that over the 30 or 40 years or whatever it's going to have to run for?
Well, just like we negotiated with them to do the RIFS, and they paid for the entire RIFS, we're going to negotiate with them to conduct the design and construction of the treatment system for this project.
Okay, I was asking specific to operation and maintenance costs, because I know
Yeah,
sometimes it's easy to get the construction covered, but
Yeah,
then those lingering
well, part of
costs.
that, when we get to the O&M part of it, that's something that's going to have to be discussed between the borough and the potential responsible party. I know EPA will try to facilitate that. What I can tell you is that the PRPs, the responsible parties, have been cooperative, since the beginning. So we don't see why they wouldn't want to be participating in that and be, helpful to the borough.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Fred Savabi. I have lived in Fairlawn for 30 years. Thank you finally for coming, meeting us, and letting us know what's going on.
You're welcome.
I have a very simple question. It's very easy to get lost within the details and the scientific data and all those things. As EPA representative, do you consider Fairlawn water safe?
Like I said, the treatment that's on it is safe water. With the treatment on it, it's
With the
safe water.
information data that you see, is it something that you will give to your son or daughter to drink, or your mother to drink?
Like I was saying, the water is treated, so the water is clean water. So yes, I would give it to my son, my daughter.
But nobody's drinking the water.
Correct. I'm saying what I'm trying to say is, if they were drinking the water, right. Currently, the water is not being utilized, but when it was utilized, there was airstrip.
Can you explain, is that utilized? What do you mean?
What I'm saying is that right now, the system is operating and it's being treated, but the water is not being distributed to the water supply system. What's happening right now is it's being discharged to the surface water, which is Henderson Brook.
To where?
Henderson Brook.
Okay.
So it's not being put into the system, the water supply system. It's still being treated. It still has the air strippers, so the water's being treated. So there isn't an issue there. Outside the fact that the 1,4-dioxane is there, which was the reason why the borough decided to.
Dioxane there, what does that mean? I'm not a scientist, I'm a financial.
Right, the 1,4-dioxane is a compound that was discovered, back in 2013. We sampled for it. It's in the water supply. We know it's there at concentrations above groundwater quality standards, as Jeff was mentioning earlier. It's not a drinking water standard, but
it's above the drinking water standard.
No, it's not. That number is not a drinking water standard. It's a groundwater quality standard. So it's
okay.
It's something that we look at as a basis to make it. Go ahead.
That means that it's not safe, or it's safe.
Well, it's a standard that's. I would say it's not. It's.
Remember, I said that let's not get lost in
right.
Scientific. Simple answers for everybody who's sitting here.
Correct.
Is that something which can cause danger to Fairlawn residents if they drink it?
Right, but no one's drinking the water now.
Nobody's drinking the water?
No one's drinking that water.
That's being drained out?
Correct.
Okay. That water which gets drained out through the drainage, and there's one which, I don't know if it's rainwater or whatever, but it comes and goes under my house towards the safety there. Is the vapors from it or the chemicals from concentration underneath my house can cause danger?
No, because we have tested a number of houses in the area.
You didn't test my house. My house is right on it.
Okay, well, I'm not sure where the house is.
By Memorial, that area.
Memorial,
By Memorial Middle School.
by the Westmoreland,
A little bit further.
No. This is in a different area of town.
Different area, yeah.
oh, well, see,
To the river.
you're talking about Memorial, the well field?
No, I'm not talking about the specific area. You said that it comes and goes. I said, and we tested. I said, nobody has tested mine. And this water comes and goes.
Right.
Is that the concentration of that chemical can cause residents health hazard?
You're saying the vapors from the
Yes,
from the
vapors and the chemicals, yes.
Okay. Vapors do migrate from the groundwater into the soils and possibly into someone's home, but we tested a number of homes around Henderson Brook within, I'll show you here. We tested a number of homes in here, all throughout the residential neighborhood. We tested the elementary school,
Which elementary school?
the Westmoreland Elementary
Okay.
School. And we didn't find any vapors entering the buildings, the homes. of the-
Anywhere else in Fairlawn is in danger, other than that area that we did. Have you considered that?
Well, we've looked at the data to determine whether which homes.
I'm not trying to be.
No, I understand. I want to try to explain to you in a way you understand. So we do look at the data and we try to determine which properties would be required for us to go.
Data from where and how you collect data
Well,
and how you choose your data?
It's the data we've collected from all the wells that we
Okay.
sampled throughout the last 4 or 5 years.
Mhm.
That data is used to assess whether the vapors are an issue in, say, the residential neighborhoods here.
Mhm.
We did that over the years. We identified certain areas, and we went there and sampled the homes. And we didn't find that there was any vapors entering those homes, including the elementary school, Westmoreland Elementary School. Now, obviously, things can change over time. And so we'll keep monitoring the groundwater for those changes. If we see those changes occur, we'll look at going back out there and resampling some of those homes. So that would be the next step.
Going back to that first question that I asked. With these wells, some of them closed, the water is not coming into the system, then as it needed gets released to the, you mentioned it gets released to the system. Do you consider Fairlawn water safe as EPA?
Well, see, again, the water's not being utilized. See, what I'm saying by that is the water, the system that's running, it's being
Do you have a
treated.
standard?
Current drinking water, I think is what he's
Yeah.
asking.
Do you have a standard for it?
Excuse me, the Fairlawn water supply always meets the state standards. They wouldn't be able to distribute it otherwise. So it meets the regulating standards that have to be met.
Can we get EPA?
He's CPA also.
Yeah. Do you agree with that comment?
That's his supervisor.
Yes.
Do you agree with that comment?
Yes.
I don't know who that gentleman is.
Yes.
Do you agree with that Fairlawn water is safe to drink?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
So I have a question. My name is Gail Rottenstreich. I'm Deputy Mayor here in Fairlawn. I have a question about the plumes because it's a little bit unclear from the picture what's going on with the plume. And I know that looks like maybe it's the general plume, and then in here we have pictures of the plume as refers to different chemicals. Am I correct?
Correct.
So
those maps there show different contaminants.
Oh, okay, they're over there.
And one for each contaminant. I believe the pink one there is the 1,4-dioxane, and the orange or yellowish one there is carbon tetrachloride. I believe, I'm not sure.
This is one.
That's 1,4-dioxane? Those are individual maps of specific compounds.
So
The entire
are they
plume-
getting better? It's hard to tell from these pictures whether the plume is improving, is it spreading into other Fairlawn well fields?
Well, it is getting to the well field. That's the reason why we're here.
No, I mean other than the Westmoreland well fields. Is it escaping into other? Is it growing?
Well, no.
Are they-
What we're seeing here is a lot of when you look at this, especially some of the data we have from different years, keep in mind that the first 2 years we had about 5 wells in, and then the second 2 years, 2015, 2016, we had like another 7 or 8 wells put in. So that makes the plume look bigger and larger just because new wells are put in afterwards. So what you're seeing here is the general size of the plume that it's always been in that way. We just now have more information that shows it where you, if we had all the wells in initially, you would have seen the same size plume the whole time.
So it's not that the contaminants are
Correct.
spreading out into other areas?
Correct.
Okay, and then...
But it is migrating to the well field because when the well field's pumping, it pulls it in.
Oh, I understand, so it's
Correct.
pulling it into the... Okay.
Correct.
And then do you know the state of the chemicals that are going into the plume? I mean, has that completely stopped?
You mean
Are there no more chemicals going into that plume, or is it still being fed by the industries that are there?
What I do know is that the industries are doing work on their properties to, one, contain the plumes on their property, and two, to remove the sources from the soil.
But they're not adding any more chemicals?
From what I understand, no, they're not.
And then just to clarify the dates of when the water will be drinkable, because it was a little confusing to me, because you were saying it's safe now, it'll be safe in 2021, or it'll be safe in 30 or 40 years. So what are we talking about when we're talking about different?
Well, we need to understand here that no one's being exposed to the water.
Because the wells are...
Because the wells are not being distributed into the water system. It's being discharged to the brook.
And discharging into the brook doesn't make the water
also
there
understand
unsafe?
there's still treatment there.
Mm-hmm.
So the numbers coming out say that's being discharged into the brook are meeting MCLs because they're still using the strippers. MCLs means the drinking water quality standards.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much.
Hi. I'm Han Broekman. I've lived here almost 20 years. I never thought that the water was really drinkable because of the swamp type fumes that came off of it. So I use a Brita filter, which is carbon mostly, for drinking. I have actually only a couple of questions, mostly already asked. One of the things that I think confuses many people is that you're treating the groundwater as it is pumped out to maybe yes, maybe no, be used as drinking water. But most people are more concerned with what they actually drink and what the contaminations in the drinking water are. So I think that you have to be a little bit more specific about what water you're talking about, the groundwater or the drinking water?
I'm talking about the water that's coming from the well field. So say if well 10 and 14 are pumping, whatever contaminants are being pulled, groundwater contamination is being pulled into those wells, that's the water I'm talking about. That water gets treated.
Right.
And
what is discharged into the system is treated to the standards that are in effect at the time, which changes from 20 years ago to 10 years from now, right?
Well, you're saying the numbers change, and obviously with science, those numbers do change.
Okay. So, and then the other question is, what Gail was already pointing at is, what is being done, really done, to remove the source of this contamination? Because you're talking about what is coming out of the plume in the groundwater. You just mentioned that indeed the responsible parties are trying to clean up what they are now putting in willy-nilly. How much more effort do you think should be done to have these responsible parties clean up what they put into the groundwater?
Well, I think they're working with the state of New Jersey to clean up their source contamination, whether it's in the soil and in the groundwater. So, I think I can rattle off, there's a pump and treat on one responsible party, There's actually other treatment systems to actually attack the contaminants in the soil. What they're doing is they're injecting solution to actually degrade the contaminants in the soil. So they are taking steps to reduce it and remove it, not just from the soil, but from the groundwater. So there are steps being taken. What we're doing here tonight is we want to make sure that the groundwater plume off the property is being handled and taken care of and contained.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Sir Chamis. I've lived here for 15 years. I have a question to clarify something. Given the way things stand right now, with those two wells turned off, and none of that water getting to the population, what is the current risk in your assessment to the population right now?
There is no risk to the population.
So we've been talking about the expensive option numbers 2 and 3. What about the first option, not to do anything and keep those wells completely shut down? That way we're sure that no water, even though the treatment is supposed to work, but this way we can be completely sure no contaminated water gets into the drinking supply.
Yeah, I think that would be something for the borough to, speak about, because I know they want to use the water as part of a supplement to the system. Now, I'm just saying this, but I'm not, that would be something to bring up.
I just wanted to add, you brought up that, what if you were to use option 1? The purpose of looking at these remedies, the goal is to return the groundwater to its most beneficial use. So the most beneficial use for the community and in the future is to use it as a drinking water supply. So with that goal in mind, option 1 would not be feasible and something that would be beneficial for the community and achieving that goal. And that's part of the NCP, which is the National Contingency Plan. So that's something that we have to consider.
I understand. It's a noble goal, but to me it carries more risk than not using that water at all. Because if there's zero risk today, you keep not using the water, there's zero risk. I understand there may be some cost, so that will need to be assessed. Right. I don't know if anyone from the town council can comment on downsides of not using these wells in the future, and being 100% sure that you don't even need the treatment, and you don't need to worry about treatment being completely effective or not, or 10 years down the line, another contaminant is discovered which we don't know much about today, just like 1,4-dioxane was discovered 5 years ago, and then we find out, oh, okay, this treatment we need to add to the treatment because we didn't consider it, but then this we've been drinking contaminated water. So to me, zero risk solution is the best solution, even if we don't achieve the noble goal of using the beneficial supply of water because contamination already happened.
Yeah, it's understandable, but for this particular, we use no action as a basis to compare other alternatives to, similar to what Julie was saying before. So that's why it's included in there, so you have an idea as to, well, we do nothing, and there's all this risk to the water, this is what you're exposed to. But if we do something, that eliminates the risk if the town's going to keep on using the water as part of the supplementary system.
Right, but
and your question basically is why even bother using
it? Why would we turn on it? We know it's contaminated water. The best treatment, I'm not sure you can say it's 100% effective for anything known and unknown at this time. And if you are to proceed with the treatment, what would be the target for 1,4-dioxane?
To target to meet?
Yes, because
the standard.
It seems like there is no standard for drinking water, so what would be the target of the treatment?
Well, the standard to meet would be what we mentioned before, would be the groundwater quality standard, which is 0.4. That would be the standard that they would have to meet for the treatment system.
I see. Is the drinking water standard, if one said in the future generally, drinking water standard would be a higher standard, meaning a lower number of parts per billion than the groundwater? Because groundwater, I'm not sure how that works. So the groundwater standard, is that considered not as rigorous because that water is not necessarily
No, it's actually not. That standard is set by the state of New Jersey at a, let's call it 10 to the -6 level. which is considered an acceptable risk level. And so none of the water that has been measured in the water supply exceeds an unacceptable risk. So within EPA's Superfund jurisdiction, anything that's a 10 to the minus fourth to 10 to the minus sixth risk is an acceptable risk range. Since we said zero risk, but there really is nothing that is zero risk. All water is chlorinated, for instance, and chlorination carries some risk for some people. So the water that has been distributed with the dioxin in it doesn't exceed an unacceptable risk number to date. Okay.
Thank you. So did anyone, who should we speak to regarding those wells? Because it seems like the decision of whether to proceed with the treatment and the deadline is September 5th, which is very close, is a little bit tied with the decision of whether to turn these wells on in the future. And nobody owns the whole thing, because EPA is responsible for the treatment option, the town is responsible for the wells. So who should we contact?
For the wells, I would say it would be, the borough itself to get in contact with them.
We have a council meeting on September 4th. Yep, a work session. You can come and during public comments. Order is actually going to be on the agenda, so you can come talk about that.
But that doesn't leave a lot of room. If the conclusion is not reached then we're past the EPA deadline. Next day. How firm is the September 5th deadline? Can that be moved to accommodate those decisions to be made first on the time?
Jeff, what do you? No.
We're not going to ask the town to make a decision about whether they want the water or not by September 5th, and our decision isn't going to say that there's a decision made one way or another. And so that's not going to matter if we extend it with respect to your question, because we're not asking the town to make that decision.
The wells
because
won't go turned back on.
right. So for us, the operation of the well field also has what Julie had alluded to is to restore the water to its most beneficial use. Right. And so we'll probably have it continue pumping and treating and just discharging it to the brook if the town doesn't want it. And that's okay, that's an acceptable solution. We're not asking them to make a decision today or tomorrow. We'll work with the town and Michael has worked extensively with the water people. That's the way it's going to be. We'll probably make a decision about just the well field and the benefits of restoring the aquifer at this point.
I see. So it seems like these are two separate decisions, right? Even if the town decides to never reopen the supply, EPA may still decide to proceed with the treatment.
Right.
Got it.
Exactly.
Neutralize that.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Doug Miller. Lived in Fairlawn my entire life, almost 40 years. I got a couple quick questions. So first, I guess that everyone keeps referring back to when the water was tested and they first found about these contaminants back in, 2013, I think they said?
Well, initially the wells were tested back in '78 when we found the
Well, I mean, the more recent test of the two other chemicals that we're talking about now.
Right, in 2013, the state went around sampling a number of different well fields in the state as part of a program.
So I guess my question is the two main chemicals that are showing the maps of the levels that were originally found, because you're now saying they haven't been tested since 2013, how dangerous were those chemicals that were in our drinking water by today's standards then?
Well, again, at that time, cyclic 1,4-dioxide, the standard was 10 parts.
Well, that's what I'm saying about using today's standards.
Using today's standard, what the effects are, you're saying?
Correct. Well, how hazardous were the chemicals then based on the standards that are in effect now? Because you're basically saying that when the wells were shut down in 2016, that residents were basically drinking that contaminated water for about 3 years. So how hazardous was that water that was being drinking for those 3 years? That's the part I'm trying to wrap my head around.
Right, so that number was lowered from, that was for 1,4-dioxane.
Yep.
It was lowered from 10 to 0.4 in the state of New Jersey. Okay. The highest level that I'm aware of was around 8. 7, between 7 and 8 that was detected in your well field. So the 0.4 is what's called a 10 to the minus 6 level. Okay, and that's a cancer risk range number. And so within Superfund, 10 to the minus 4th to 10 to the minus 6 is acceptable risk range. This is at the very, very least number of risk at 0.4. So if you have 7, in order to figure 10 to the minus 5th, that would be 4, the number 4. At 10 to the minus 4th, it would be 40. So you were at 7. So you were at 10 to the minus 5th, which is an acceptable risk range.
Okay,
And
so even at the worst, it was still within the acceptable levels.
Right.
Okay, that's really all 1 minute.
Also, as a scientist, I used to work with radioactivity, and we had to count how much radioactivity we were using. And one of the cocktails, as they are called, for measuring radioactivity contained dioxide. So I'm still here.
Good evening. David Gottlieb, Westmoreland Avenue, Fair Lawn, New Jersey. I believe it was around 2012 or 2013.
You sampled your home for?
Yes, sampled my house for vapors, and there were no vapors. It was fantastic. But going through the booklet, on page 26, the PC overburden plume was...
This is in the proposed plan?
Here. Yeah.
Was much, the area was much smaller in like June 2010 and March 2011 compared to November 2015 and June 2016. And so, and my house was checked back in around 2013. So the question is, with the plume being much larger in 2016, did you mention that that the EPA was going to go around once again to check for vapors? Is there going to be another round, or not? Because I see the plume is a lot larger now.
Yeah, this obviously between 2010, 2011, 2015, 2016, more wells were installed, so we now have a better idea where the plume is.
Okay.
What I'm trying to understand and see here is this is a water table. Okay. So we need to see exactly what the concentrations are and what depth to know whether vapors are actually moving into anybody's homes.
Okay.
Or say potentially moving into anybody's home.
Okay.
So this is a hard map to really gauge as to what's happening underneath. So I guess what you're asking is for us to re-look at this and see if there's a necessity to go back out and maybe retest your home.
Because it's been 5 years, and I see that it's a dramatically larger area.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I know there were several water table monitors we put down there. I know we looked at the data back when we collected the information, and we didn't see a need to go back out there. But maybe I should go back and relook and see if there's something that we missed, and maybe we should go.
Okay. Well, not only my house, but
Oh yes, whatever. I mean, obviously
school.
we'll look at the extent of the plume, and if it's under a different a number of homes, we'll look at all of it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any more comments, questions? Remember, the public comment period is open till September 5th. You can email them or send them hard copy to Michael. And if we don't have any more comments or questions, I'd like to thank you for coming out to the meeting. Please feel free to reach out to any one of us. Our contact information is in the proposed plan. And have a good night. Get home safe.
Thank you.